Good morning. Yeah, basically the birth date is announced already. My job is more or less to say how the birth will happen, and how we can prepare for this. Yeah. So yeah, as usual for these presentations, if there's something unclear in the middle of it, please don't hesitate to ask questions, because otherwise it might be hard to follow as we try to basically build up a story here. As you see, we want to follow with basically those chapters here. So first a bit on the general framework, how migration should work. Then a bit on the migration weekend, how we prepared for the migration weekend in the pre-migration phase, and also the migration preparation that is going on right now. Yeah, so the date was basically announced. So we have 22nd of June 2015. The first CSDs joining T2S. We also have the dates for the other siblings in the end. So this will continue until 6th of February 2017. So in the end, we are planning somehow 4 kids here. And the question is more or less, what do we do? And of course, basically on the Monday, 22nd of June, the story is over, at least for the first wave. So what is happening is actually the weekend, or the migration will happen on the weekend before the 22nd of June. And this is what we want to have a look at. The next slide probably is also not so new. So as Mark already mentioned, we have now a new addition in the 4th wave with the Bony Melon CSD. Otherwise, you see the planned dates for the other waves. This is not new, but still we have to make it. And you also see that we mentioned the contingency wave, but there we don't really have a planning because we hope we don't need it. And if we would need it, then it's a matter of what are the reasons for needing it, and then probably we have to plan based on this information, but this is nothing that we can do today. What do we have to consider as part of the migration? In the end, we see more or less 4 areas that we will also cover in the presentation today. So it's first the actors, because in the end the migration is not a miracle. So we need basically actors doing something on the migration weekend, and this is more or less the CSDs or central banks, the VCB colleagues as the T2S operator, also the T2S program office, the network providers. Basically we have a lot of actors that have to work together to ensure that in the end we manage the migration as planned on this weekend, and also all the steps before and afterwards. Certainly we need T2S, because without the target system there's no sense in migrating. And of course, the core of the migration is in the end the data that we have to move into the system. So we have static data, dynamic data that needs to be migrated. We will see this in a while. And of course, and this is also an important part, are the processes. This is more or less the playbook that we have to follow to ensure the migration, that we have the proper coordination there, like in a theater play in the end, so that nobody misses his keyword when he has to start a certain activity, so that everything can go hand in hand. This is what we will have a look as well. How is this monitoring and coordination in the end ensured? Similar to the synchronization points that Mark presented already, we also have identified the need to synchronize some activities for the migration. This is what we call the migration synchronization points. And those synchronization points will be used to coordinate, as I said, the keywords for the different activities. They will also be used to monitor the progress on the migration, to see what is or how far the different actors that are involved in a certain migration wave are with their preparation, with their steps. And maybe to give you an example how those synchronization points could look like, if we want to load the existing securities positions into the system, and we want to reconcile the positions on the omnibus and the mirror accounts. Of course, we have to ensure that the positions are loaded on those two accounts, but the two accounts are in two different CSDs. Yeah? And actually, to start the reconciliation, we want to ensure that all the positions are in, because otherwise it does not make sense to start such a reconciliation. And in the same way, we also want to see that we can somehow load or start with the position creation, or if we have created the positions before we can load the instructions that actually depend on this. And that's why what you see on this slide is that on a high level, we have certain activities that are basically synchronized via these synchronization point. And of course, it looks on the high level very sequential, very easy, but in the end it is not necessarily the case. Because the synchronization points, they are also somehow giving the pace for what is possible, how fast we can go forward. And therefore, also in the migration subgroup, we are trying to identify options to better parallelize and make better use of the time that we have, and also better use of the resources that we have, so that not always one side is waiting for the other one to complete something. So yeah, these are more or less the activities. Who is doing something on the migration weekend? As said, we have the actors on the migration weekend. Also in the preparation, we try to involve as many of those actors already. So in the migration subgroup, where we discuss all the details right now, we have representatives from the CSDs, from the central banks. We also have user representatives. Of course, we can't have everybody in the room, because then we end up with an audience like today, and it's hard to really have a discussion on the working level, make good progress. But of course, we also assume that the CSDs and central banks, they are somehow the factors to contribute also from, or the information from their market into the group, and in the same way they will also multiply the informations and the decisions that we see in the group into their markets and communities. And what we see here is more or less the setup for the preparation. Of course, for the real execution, we still have some way to go and to discuss who needs to be involved, who is taking which responsibility on the actual migration execution.
Sorry, Holger, I take the freedom to interrupt you from time to time, but I invite the audience to do the same. So if you have any question, don't hesitate to interrupt. So we are looking for a rather dynamic session. So for those who are connected on Twitter as well, they can send us questions. But just to complement what you've said, so we are not looking for a too big size for the MSG, so the migration subgroup, but the size is already today reasonable. So yesterday we had one meeting, for example, of the MSG. We are about 40. So it's and it's the same for the user testing subgroup.
Yes, so we have 40, but of course this is still slightly less than the number of markets times 2, because we have the CSD and the central bank side. Of course, we have some CSDs that are covering several markets, but still, and this is also one of the reasons for the session today. We also want to ensure that all markets are prepared in a way, and this is also one of the key points of this session today, to basically allow everybody to get up to speed and know what is the status of our discussion. What we see here is more or less the actors that we have identified so far, or that are obvious for the execution of the migration itself. So we have the Euro system on one side, as we provide the platform. Of course, we also see ourselves in a coordination role. And we have the central banks and the CSDs that actually have to do the migration, not alone, but they have to basically handle a very large part of this. And of course, we also have the CSD participants and the payment banks, so the clients of the central banks. And of course, they will also be impacted by the migration, to which extent they have to basically contribute to the migration itself or work on the migration. This is something that needs to be discussed within each market, as in the end, each market has a slightly different setup, and therefore, basically, it's the best place within the national user groups for each market to discuss what is the best way forward to prepare for this, and also to do the migration of this activities to T2S. And so in the sense we have outsourced this a bit. So we are trying to coordinate the activities with the CSDs and central banks and use them as a multiplicator for the markets. So that's it on the general framework. I would now continue with the migration weekend. Migration weekend. Right now, we plan activities between Friday 7:15 and Monday 5. Where do these times come from? In the end, Friday 7:15 is more or less, at least for the waves 2 to 4, the first time when we can start some migration activities. As at this, or for those waves, we have somebody who is productive on the platform already, and we of course have to ensure that the Friday settlement day is closed properly. Monday 5 o'clock is the planned start date for the real-time settlement, and of course this is something that we see more or less as a fixed cornerstone, so we cannot really move there or don't have much flexibility to take another half a day for the migration, and that leaves us more or less with 58 hours and a bit to perform all migration-related activities. But of course, within these 58 hours, we also have to do the nighttime settlement that would normally happen. The only point is that here we have a bit of flexibility to move this around, and we will need this also because the nighttime settlement needs to be completed also for the CSDs that are joining. And of course, to do this, we first need to complete the migration activities itself. But when we see we have 58 hours, it's also obvious that the weekend is relatively short. And similar to the analogy that Mehdi was drawing, we cannot really extend the time here. So that means we need to be very efficient on the weekend itself. And this is more or less bringing me to my next slide. The question is, what do we have to do on the weekend? Or is there maybe something that we can do before the weekend? And the point here is, and I think those points are relatively obvious, we cannot, or we have to migrate the positions, we have to migrate pending instructions on the weekend itself. We can't do this a week before, because they will still change in the legacy systems of the CSDs. There will also be some permanent static data updates that are happening to the configurations, to the accounts, to the clients, and so on. So whatever happens there in the last days before the migration certainly needs also be done on the weekend itself. There's no chance that we can move this forward. And but nevertheless, to reduce the number of activities that we have to perform on the weekend itself, more or less the idea or the goal that we have is to say everything that can be migrated before the migration weekend should also be migrated before the migration weekend. Of course, this is mainly applying to the static data part, so that there we have foreseen a pre-migration phase before the migration weekend to do these setups. And nevertheless, we need a very tight time schedule for the weekend itself to coordinate all the activities. What do we need to migrate still on the weekend? We have summarized this here on 2 slides. So we have basically dynamic data, as said, securities positions, cash balances, they should be moved in via the usual, or via some features of the platform. So we try to reuse to the extent possible existing features of the platform to also ensure the consistency, that we do not introduce inconsistencies in the migration itself, also to reduce the risks on this. And also we have to introduce then instructions, so pending instructions that are either pending in the legacy systems of the CSDs or new instructions for the settlement day Monday. All this needs to be migrated. And who's doing what? This is what we see on the more or less on the next slide. So there we have the key actors. Of course, those are the ones that migrate, so the CSDs and central banks of the migration wave. But what we also see is that those actors that have migrated in an earlier wave, they are also impacted by the migration. For instance, already migrated CSDs, they have to update their configuration for the CSD links. Already migrated central banks might want to offer additional service in terms of auto-collateralization, for instance, in addition to only offering cash services. And so they are also basically involved in the actual activities on the weekend. And in the same way, it could be that also clients of CSD or central banks are involved. But this in the end, or as mentioned, is part of the discussion between the CSDs and central banks and their communities to see how much involvement is necessary. As from our point of view, we also want to certainly reduce a bit the number of actors that we have to coordinate on the weekend itself to lighten the process a bit. Yeah? With having those many actors, if we have a look basically in migration wave 4, we will have everybody impacted. So there we speak about 50 actors already. This is certainly a challenge, yeah, that we are facing there. And last not least, we also have the RTGS operators and also the network service providers, because they also play a key role, because without them it's probably hard to transfer the data to the platform or to see that everything works. This slide shows us on a high level some the activities of the weekend. So the 58 hours that I mentioned is more or less the time that we have between the two dashed red lines on this slide. And what you see in the darker blue color here is more or less those activities that we would normally perform on the weekend. What we see in the lighter blue color here is the additional migration activities that we have to fit in to the scheduling of this weekend for actually performing the migration. Yeah. And of course, for the dark ones, we have to see, especially for the later waves, that we minimize the impact on the production of those markets that are already in production. For the lighter parts, we have a bit more freedom to define them, but still we have to keep in mind that the weekend is relatively short and that we have to be efficient, and that there's really only a very short or very little margin for error and very little time to correct mistakes. So how does it look more or less on a high level? Again, as I said, it looks relatively sequential. We will see on one of the next slides that this is not necessarily the case. But still, when we start on a high level, so the dark box on the left upper side is basically the last static data updates, then followed and read by the creation of the securities positions on the securities accounts. In green, we have the transfer of instructions, pending and new instructions for the settlement. And in yellow, then the actual nighttime settlement that we have to perform, as I mentioned, that we also have to do on the weekend. And then after the yellow part, we are more or less finished with the weekend activities, as the purple box is then the real-time settlement that we have to start on Monday. Yes, please.
You said this is rather sequential in the order. Is there an official announcement like MSP2 has been met, now we are proceeding, or is actually I have to watch out for the 58 hours to get it done.
So I can also repeat the question. So the question is basically how we communicate or coordinate those activities, whether we announce that a certain synchronization point is met, or whether this is more or less time-driven. Yeah? Certainly, this is part of the coordination that we have to do. Right now, we are still working on the preparation to define how the process has to look like for the activities. But we have identified the need for this kind of coordination. So we need a central coordination where we monitor what is the progress for each actor. And of course, this is then also transparent to the other actors because they are impacted by a delay of one actor, or maybe, although it's probably unlikely that we are somehow ahead of schedule. Yeah? Then this would also be in everybody's interest to see this, because then we could start the next activities earlier. And so this is part of the monitoring that we foresee. So we have coined the term of a migration information center for this, although right now this is more or less a black box, because we still have to define what we put there. Because right now, as I said, we are focusing on the process itself, because there is some impact on the development that the CSDs, or development of tools and so on, and procedures that the CSDs, central banks, and also on the Eurosystem side, we have to deliver and do. For the other ones, we still have a bit more time, but it is foreseen to have somehow a central status monitoring for this. Of course, we have to agree what is the right level for this. Yeah. But the idea is to be transparent on this. Yes. Yes. Maybe we have microphones there, yes. Then it would help. Just for the others to easier understand, and also for those that follow us on the webcast.
Okay. Yeah, just a quick question. In terms of the potential volumes for each wave, to ensure that it is feasible to actually complete the migration process within that given 50-odd hour window.
58 hours, yes.
So, are there any volumes or stats available?
Yes, we have asked. We have regular input from the CSDs on the settlement volumes that they have. So this is what we monitor anyway for checking on the volumes and to see for the financial aspects. And we have also asked for some input on the migration-related volumes from the different CSDs and central banks. In this case, it's more the CSDs, because there we have the larger volumes that we have to migrate. And we are doing some planning on this. So in the end, the idea is to have really a detailed planning for each migration wave. The problem that we face right now is that the system is not 100% finally developed. So our FOSSIB colleagues are doing the last tweaks on the development. They have started testing. And of course, we need the system also to test how fast certain processes are. So right now we are taking some figures from the service level agreement, but of course we all hope that they are more on the safe side, so that the actual process is faster than what we have there. And this should be confirmed later this year with some bottleneck tests, and also in the course of next year when we do some performance tests. And then we will basically review the estimations that we have for the different activities to see where we end up with the timing. The timing will be different for each wave, as the type of data that needs to be migrated will be different for each wave. The volumes are different. And only then we can finally say whether it works out or not. We are relatively convinced that it could work for wave 1, because there we have lesser volumes, yeah, and of course we have the full system there. We don't need to pay attention to any production that is on the platform before. For wave 2 we have somehow 4 days, so there we are also a bit more relaxed on the timing. But for the other ways, definitely we have to go to the very detail to see that we have enough time also for potential contingency situations and so on. fix if something goes wrong.
Sorry, just one other question. So within the testing phase, is there a test phase for migration itself?
I don't want to basically take too much away from Katrin's presentation later on. Yeah? So we will, certainly there is migration testing, and we will do some rehearsals to see whether it's feasible. This is part of the user testing. Yes.
Just a general question. On the migration weekend, obviously I think your slide had reference to liquidity transfers or trialing of those. How do you foresee the funding of the nighttime cycle, or do you not foresee any funding required at all during that migration weekend?
No, the nighttime settlement should work as a normal nighttime settlement. We are a bit, the situation on the cash side is slightly different than on the security side, as T2S is supposed to have no liquidity in the system overnight. So between end of day and start of day, there should be no liquidity in the system. And that means that it's the usual procedure to inject liquidity for the nighttime settlement. And this is, of course, what we also expect for the migration weekend, that those liquidity injections from the RTGS systems will be performed to provide sufficient liquidity for the nighttime settlement, in addition to the other means like auto-collateralization to provide liquidity in the system. But liquidity injections are foreseen, and they are actually the first sequence of the nighttime settlement to process those liquidity injections into.
So you are expecting those injections in for the migration weekend. So businesses have to be aware they have to obviously. So it's actually starting on the 18th, because effectively T+2 starts on the 18th. So people looking at their forecast for funding on T0, T1, and T2 have to account for that. Then they're going to be putting cash into T2S for provision of securities for settlement for the nighttime cycle. Just an observation, that's all.
Yeah, as said, the liquidity needs to be injected. The difference on the migration weekend is that we need the liquidity at a later point. Yeah, but on a normal weekend we would do the nighttime settlement also on the Friday evening.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is more or less the same. So the liquidity injections to T2S on a normal weekend would be triggered Friday after start of day. And this is what we more or less expect also for the migration weekend. Okay. We are discussing with the central bank colleagues basically what is the best way of doing this, because we also want to reduce the risk of having liquidity in the system and then something going wrong on the migration weekend itself. What is the best way and to reduce the risks for this, and still also not necessarily increasing the risks for the actors. There we are working with the central bank colleagues to somehow make it possible, but yeah, this is the detailed work that we do right now, and then as said, basically we expect then that the central banks will work as a multiplier in the end. Once we have found a solution, then to also communicate and agree with each market on what is the best way to handle it based on how is the current way of doing it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Yes, there's another question.
Yes, how will DCPs, or what Mark called full DCPs this morning, fit into the migration reporting framework? Will they have to be considered as an actor like CSDs or NCBs reporting directly to you? Or are they going to go for that part through their CSD?
This is one of the open questions that we still work on right now. As said, we are hoping actually that we can somehow eliminate them from the time-critical activities, at least, to reduce the number of organizations that we have to coordinate. But there are some activities where, as of now, we cannot completely rule out that they have to play a certain role. But this is certainly something that needs to be discussed then with the CSD or central bank on what is the best way of handling this in the context of migration. Right now we are trying to come up with the overall story, and with this we then also identify where a potential involvement of DCPs could happen, and then it needs to be discussed what is the best way to address this. But again, there could be different solutions for the different markets. It could be that the CSD or central bank is taking over part of those activities. It could be that we can move some of those activities to the Friday already. This is then what we have to look into in detail. Yeah. Okay, so as said, this is more or less the high-level view. It looks rather sequential. On the next slide, we have an example where we go basically one level deeper. Please, those diagrams, you not necessarily have to read them. The point is more or less to illustrate what we are doing. So here you see that not necessarily the different activities are so sequential in the execution, because here we see that. For instance, we could do some static data reconciliation at the same time while we process feeds from the collateral management systems, and foreseen for wave 1, we have some trials on the liquidity and cash side to test rather at the start of the migration weekend that the settlement engine is working. So these are examples for activities where we could have a certain degree of parallelization. And nevertheless, we then have the synchronization points again where we have the synchronization. Of course, it's not always so simple for some other activities. It's really like still sequential as we had seen on the higher level. But then basically we have those activities and we have to wait that everybody more or less completed certain activities before we can continue. And this is then basically marked by those migration synchronization points that we have identified, because they are identified for those points in time when we need to see that everybody has reached a certain status in its migration activities. We also have a last one. This is more or less to illustrate that it also very much depends on what is going on the weekend itself, because potentially a huge impact could come from any problems that we encounter on the weekend itself. So what we will foresee is certainly that we have phases for repairing certain data that has been migrated, where we have identified that, for instance, settlement instruction could not be migrated to the platform because something else was not set up, an account is missing or whatever. Or we detect that the account is missing and we have to create it. And this is more or less, we foresee these repair activities. Of course, we hope that we don't need them. Yeah? But if we need them, then they certainly have an impact on the timing. And this is more or less what we see here. And whether we need them or not will be impacted by the quality of the testing that we do beforehand. Yeah? And therefore, in the sense of quality of preparation of the processes itself, and also the preparation of the people that have to basically contribute to the migration on the weekend. And it will also be heavily influenced by the tools that are available on all sides to actually make the migration happening. So the tools to generate the files that are uploaded to the platform, the tools to reconcile the data that is retrieved from the platform against the data in the legacy systems, and so on. Obviously, we need a certain level of automation there. Of course, on the other hand, it's for most actors hopefully a one-time effort. Yeah? So we have to find the right balance there. Yeah. On this side, we see that we also have to pay some attention to some specific aspects on the migration itself. So because the migration is not only copying data from one system to another, it's also moving from one system to another, and the legacy system in most CSDs will work slightly different than what T2S is going to do. So there will also be a change, either a change of data or some transformation and so on. And some of those aspects also come from the fact that right now we have more or less one CSD, one platform with a few exceptions. But with T2S, we suddenly have several CSD on the same platform. We have cross-CSD settlement on the platform. And of course, we have to ensure that all this then properly fits together. And the other point is that in the end, we have the new system with existing business, so we have pending instructions that have to be uploaded to the system. And there might be the need to transform them slightly because we might have different account numbers in T2S, for instance. Yeah. And what we also see is that with each wave joining, those CSDs that have migrated earlier, they will also be impacted as we have changes to the CSD link configuration, as a link that was before between a CSD on T2S and with a CSD that is outside of T2S might now be a link between two CSDs in T2S. And then there's the need to also update some data and maybe also update some of the instructions to properly reflect this. And therefore we need to properly plan and prepare those activities. So I mentioned earlier that the pre-migration phase.
Maybe we open for a question from the floor again before moving to the pre-migration. If you still have some question on the migration weekend itself, yes, please. Could you please wait for the microphone, you know?
Thank you. Are there synchronization points during the weekend itself, or will the various migrating parties, they'll be independent to continue with their activities as you've potentially laid out?
No, that there will be definitely synchronization points. So basically all synchronization points that you had seen on the slides here, they are all from the weekend itself. Yeah, we have, we will come to this in a minute, also some synchronization before, but on this slide you more or less see all the synchronization points on the weekend, as we have to see that everybody more or less moves in the same, or with the same speed, or at least we give everybody the chance to catch up. Because for some activities, we have to wait that everybody is there. Yeah? For instance, to upload the positions, you have to ensure that all the securities are in, because otherwise some positions in a security that is maintained by another CSD will be rejected because T2S is not aware of the security. Yeah? So we have to ensure that all the securities are there, only then we can start uploading the positions. Then before we want to upload the instructions, we want to reconcile that the positions match. This is certainly something that each CSD can do internally, but it needs also to be reconciled between the omnibus and the mirror account. Yeah? Here again, we have the synchronization between different CSDs. And basically, this is always the reason for those activities. Or then we start some settlement processes to basically settle the positions, to create the positions. And to do this, we have to ensure that everybody is ready for this to be run. Yeah? So therefore, we have those synchronization points through the weekend. And this is, first of all, to synchronize, but also to monitor that everybody is keeping up. And we do not discover short or Sunday afternoon that one CSD has big problems in the end. Yes, there's another question.
I'd like to ask two questions. The one is there a role of those CSTs and NCPs that have not migrated yet? So do they have to ensure if the links still work with the newly migrated parties? And secondly, what kind of tool will be available to kind of track if the different migration synchronization points have been reached? Will there be a teleconference or an online tool? How will this be set up? Okay, thank you.
Okay, so regarding those that migrate at a later point in time, so they are neither migrated nor migrating right now, they are more or less probably impacted in a similar way as other participants, or in the end, as an investor CSD, they are similarly impacted as participants of migrating CSD. But basically, those impacts should be tested more or less as part of the testing. We will see this later, how the testing works itself. But for the time being, we have not really foreseen or identified the need for an active role for those that are neither migrated nor migrating on the weekend itself. Regarding the second question about the coordination.
Maybe, Holger, on this point, there is something that is slightly on the borderline, which what we call the SME CSD, so Security Maintaining Entity CSDs. This refers to the CSD who are not really migrating on that date, but for which their securities issued in their books are used by other CSDs. In some cases, they have to be involved in this migration wave to maintain the security reference data, for example. So there could be some impact on the other ones.
Okay. Yes, this is a valid point. Of course, in the end, nobody is forced to become an SME before the migration wave that they envisage. But then, in the end, another CSD would have to take over the role in the meantime. On the coordination aspect, this is, as I said, right now we are focusing on the process as such, because there we need to identify or to clarify this, because there potentially we have the need to develop some tools. On the coordination itself, certainly we will have some telephone conferences. We also plan to update or to track the status in a way online, so that everybody who is involved in the migration can see what is the current status there. This is, again, what I called earlier the Migration Information Center. The details are still to be worked out. Right now we are collecting the different aspects there, the different needs. But also from the past, or we are also trying to draw some experience from the past migration on Target 2, where we also had lots of actors involved, and we will certainly have a look how it was done there, what we can reuse, and where we have to maybe add something or go beyond of what was done there.
Other questions? No, so then we continue with the pre-migration phase.
Pre-migration phase. So so far we were looking at the weekend, but we said we should try to migrate before the weekend, whatever we can migrate before the weekend. And this is in the end what we call the pre-migration phase. And one aspect there is that right now we have foreseen that the pre-migration phase lasts 3 months. Of course, could be questions why 3 months, not 2 or 4. Yeah, but more or less we have seen this as a good compromise to have sufficient time to prepare the data, because there are also some. It's not so straightforward as well. On the other hand, we don't want to have too much time pressure. And one aspect that we have to keep in mind as well, that and that's why we don't want to extend it too much, is the fact that as soon as certain data is migrated, or certain static data is migrated, it also needs to be maintained on T2S. Yeah? So as soon as you, for instance, have created, or a CSD has created its clients on the platform, of course, if there are new clients, they have to be set up. If clients basically leave the CSD, they have to be removed. The same way then accounts for those clients and so on. Because otherwise, if you do it 3 months before and then don't update anything until the weekend, you're not really gaining much. Yeah? So that means as soon as you say, okay, now my clients are on the platform, there is also then the day-to-day business to maintain the data. And the same applies for securities and so on. And yeah, what kind of data do we need to, or can we migrate as part of the pre-migration phase? So we have one category here. This is more or less the general aspect. So this applies to CSDs and central banks. Of course, they have some kind of metadata. They have parties. They can configure messaging and reporting for themselves and for their clients. They can define certain additional validation rules, they can set up their own users and roles and also start granting privileges to their clients. But of course, we also have some data that is specific to the securities or the cache side. This is what we have listed here. So we have more or less the static data for the CSDs. That means securities accounts, and the CSD link configurations. We have static data for the CSDs, the cache accounts, obviously, the credit memorandum balances. So this is more or less what is creating the link later on between this, the DCAs and the securities accounts. And they also have certain aspects of the securities to configure, in the end, the data that is required for the auto-collateralization if they want to offer this after the migration. So this is then eligibility and valuation of securities. And you see this is lots of data in the end. So it's just a few lines here, but in the end it's lots of data that needs to be migrated. So several CSDs have millions of securities that they would have to set up beforehand. And of course, this needs to be coordinated. What we have listed here is more or less what the different actors have to do. Basically, of course, the migrating actors have a leading role here as well. But as stated, also the already migrated CSDs and central banks will have to update parts of their static data configuration. Also, some CSD or central bank participants might be involved in the configuration already, for instance, for creating users, setting up the privileges for their users. And of course, we also have the T2S operator and also the network providers and the RTGS system operators, because they are also involved in the technical setup. They have to see that everything works properly there. Yeah, and again, CSD central banks, we see them more or less also as in a leading role to coordinate the activities for their communities. Yeah. Again, this is similar to the train-the-trainer. We have somehow this leveled approach. Yeah. So we have seen the data. On the next slide, we see basically that it's not so easy to just upload the data, because in the end we have to ensure the consistency of the data on the platform. And this is what we try to highlight here, that there are certain dependencies. So for instance, we cannot have an account without having an account owner on the platform. Yeah? Therefore, we first need to set up the parties that should later on own or be configured as the account owner. And what is also important here is that we also have dependencies between different actors. Yeah? So you have CSDs configuring their clients, their securities accounts. We have central banks configuring their clients and the cash accounts. But as mentioned, we also have to link the cash accounts and the securities accounts. Yeah? So at one point, we have to coordinate that the two accounts exist that should actually be linked. And in the same way, when central banks want to configure which securities are eligible for the auto-collateralization, certainly the security that should be eligible must exist on the platform. Yeah? And this is more or less where when you see an arrow going here between the green and the blue part, then we have a dependency, for instance, between the CSD and the central bank. But we also have dependencies between different CSDs, yeah, as we had mentioned, between the omnibus and mirror accounts, or for the setup of the CSD links. So this is what we have analyzed in detail, because these dependencies play a key role in the pre-migration phase. And in the end, for all those activities, we have identified what are the prerequisites to configure something. And we ended up with a relatively large dependency chart here. And whenever we see that there is a dependency between different actors, so between a CSD or a central bank, or between different CSDs, for instance, this is when we have identified a synchronization point to ensure the synchronization of those activities, so that For instance, when the CSDs want to link the securities account to the DCAs, that beforehand they have the green light from the central banks to say, okay, all the DCAs have been set up, you can configure this, because otherwise they would have to filter or parts of their configuration is failing and then they have to redo it. And this is what we want to avoid with those synchronization points. And this also underlines why it's important that once this static data is configured, it's important to maintain this and keep it up to date. Because if we have new customers, they also need links between the accounts. And then, of course, the CSDs will rely on the fact that the cash account has been set up after the central bank has communicated this, and vice versa for the central bank, for instance, to configure their collateral accounts. What we have to say is that, of course, for the pre-migration phase, we have more time. We have foreseen these 3 months. But still, due to these dependencies, there's still the need to properly plan those activities. First of all, to have a resource allocation, not that everybody is planning to set up everything in the last week, but also for those coordination aspects to see that everybody has sufficient time for his setup, even if he has to wait for certain prerequisites. And we will use this plan, of course, also to monitor the progress on the during the pre-migration phase. Again, with similar tools, or probably the same tools as we foresee for the migration weekend itself, so that it's transparent for everybody what is the status of the preparation or of the work in the pre-migration phase. So that's it for the pre-migration phase. Mehdi normally wants to ask for questions, so please.
Yes. I mean, if you have any question on the pre-migration phase at this stage? No? Okay, so let's continue with the presentation.
Okay, last part is the migration preparation. Yeah, what we see here is similar to a slide that Mark already presented earlier. So we are in the middle of the preparation phase. Or middle is maybe not the right word. We are somehow in the last third for the preparation. This still seems to be a long time because we still have something like 2 years, nearly. But what we have to take into account is that, of course, from those 2 years we have to subtract the 3 months pre-migration phase. But we will also need some time to develop the tools, the procedures internally to test all this. And that's why it's not so much time in the end. And we are under relatively high pressure to finalize our work, at least regarding the processing or the processes that we have to follow for the migration, to ensure that all actors can prepare in time for the migration. Certainly for the first wave, but we will then repeat this hopefully only 3 times for the other waves as well. And I assume, and this also shows the question that we had earlier, that nobody really wants to do this without or try such a migration without testing beforehand. This we will then see in Katrin's presentation. Yeah, of course, this is more or less the status where we are. So the concept is there. As said, we are trying to finalize the details on the process as part of the preparation. Then, of course, we still have to work on the tools like the Migration Information Center. The implementation itself is probably rather short. It's something like 3 months plus 1 weekend. Yeah? And certainly is repeated several times. And every time we also want to have a look back, what went well, what could be improved as part of the migration. And therefore we hope that with each migration wave, we are getting better and better. Of course, the volumes are also increasing slightly for some waves. Yeah? And so we need this. I mentioned the challenge earlier. Yeah, our main deliverables on the migration workstream, they are listed here. This is what we are working on. As said, it's mainly for the involved actors on the migration, so the CSDs, central banks, that have an active role in or executing the migration. And we see them as the multiplicator, because in the end the CSDs and central bank have to agree with their communities, with their market, on how it should work for their market, the actual migration to T2S. And of course they will base their work also on those deliverables that we jointly discuss and agree in the end. Yeah. So those are the two slides listing them here. Yeah, that's basically the end of my presentation. If there are questions, please feel free.
Questions from the audience? Yes, please, Oreste.
I have in fact 2 or 3 questions that I waited at the end to see where it would be fit. And the first one is in terms of actors and in the first wave. You mentioned on the slide very nicely that there are different types of actors. But yes, where and when do we know? I am at Swift, sorry. I should have introduced myself. I am at Swift. And we get a lot of questions from our community about what they think they have to do, and we don't have the answer. And in terms really about, in the first wave, who should be present? And then there's a question is about cash banks, all of them, because they can have a customer who require cash. CSD, which have the choice being security maintenance entity, a bit unclear, because it seems that they have the choice. Cash banks have the choice as well. If they don't have clients, they don't need to be present, basically. And all these central banks, meaning we don't know if all the central banks need to be in the first wave, meaning these kind of things. Meaning who are these actors, the numbers, and therefore, do they need a connectivity? Because the second question is obviously all this maintenance which is done between the first wave and the end of the migration, we suppose that it has to be done through one of the 2 VAN and not through other means. And also it's a clarification. And then the question underlying is really the VAN provider, which is on the bottom of the slide, meaning you exclude, between quotes, the financial institution from the groups, but we receive really second or third hand information, which is not easy to answer our own customers, basically.
Yeah, maybe I start with the second question because it's the easiest. In the end, of course, the network the setup will be done via the WAN providers, as the dedicated link is no longer an option, as we learned earlier today. Basically, everything that is communicated between the customers and the T2S platform will go through the WAN providers in the end. This is the only connectivity mean in the end that is there. Yeah. Of course, we have some direct activities from the 4CB colleagues from the T2S operator. Of course, they will work directly on the system. And on the migration weekend, we have, in addition, the connectivity to target 2 for the cache injections. But the rest, in the end, has to go via the WAN providers. And the different access channels that we have defined for the migration. Yeah. So what we have defined there is more or less that we can do it via A2A, by sending A2A files, by doing it via U2A, so using the T2S GUI, or via using a data migration tool. But in the end, this is also creating a file, uploading this to the platform to be processed there. Regarding the actors or who needs to be involved in the first migration wave, this is more or less a matter of dependencies between the different actors. So we definitely know which CSDs will be in. Definitely their customers will be impacted. And then from there, we have to see in the end the dependencies. Yeah? If basically a bank that has a securities account with one of the Wave 1 CSDs, those banks certainly need a DCA to fund their DVP settlement. And for this, they have to open a DCA with a central bank. Yeah? It could be a central bank of one of the same markets, but it could also be a central bank of another market. And therefore, in the end, all the Euro central banks are ready to open DCAs as of Wave 1. And this is also what we have basically received as a confirmation that they are ready to offer the cash part of their services, so to create DCAs and allow liquidity transfers between T2 and T2S as of wave 1. This is in the end valid for all Euro central banks. Of course, they will also wait whether one of their customers actually expresses the need to open a DCA. They will not just open all DCAs just in case an actor requests it. Yeah? So therefore, in the end, it's basically going in those different steps. So the settlement banks, so those that are involved on the security side, they have to define which DCAs they want to use. With this, they know then the central banks can open the DCAs, and either it's a DCA that belongs to the same bank, or if they are using a liquidity provider, then of course they have to inform their liquidity provider so that they can then request with the central bank the proper setup of the DCAs. But this is more or less something that needs to be coordinated between the different market actors. We have the starting point, and the rest depends on the business relationships between those actors. Yeah.
But then in the whole pre-migration preparation, which starts basically now and towards the end of the year, is it not a milestone somewhere where we get a bit more clarity about, because I heard that the securities DCP, whatever the new name is, they have to declare their intention by year end, more or less, by October, November, I don't know. And then from there, is it not possible to try to figure out who are the one providing the cash, and or is it all secret and we just wait for our customers to say, I need a connection?
It's not secret. It's absolutely not secret. But this is why we are organizing.
The relationship may be a bit confidential, is what I meant.
Maybe I don't know if you were there at the time of the introduction, but this is what we are aiming out of this info session. So to create the awareness that things have to happen today. So it's not secret, but there is a need for taking as soon as possible some key strategic business organizational decision today. And this is, you are absolutely right, not crystal clear for the time being. This is the first info session on the topic of user testing and migration, so we try to keep it as simple as possible. So you are right when you said who are these actors. So we, even on this slide, that slide, we try to keep things simple. So we refer to CSD, to central banks. Actually, there is a second layer of complexity below this, is that each of these entities can be present in the T2S platform with different rules. So a CSD is itself a client of another CSD. The central bank is also a client of a CSD and vice versa. The central bank, they have different rules. So they can be present from the first wave with one rule, but joining in a later wave with the full rule of a central bank. We are trying to progress on this topic, so we are permanently making surveys, consultation in order to collect the information on this aspect. And it's not a matter of keeping things secret, but people have to think about their business model. So we don't have the information today, and the different actors are still in the process of building their own strategy and building their mind about how to approach this migration and the different waves that we propose for T2S.
My name is Karen Bierkel. I'd like to compliment my colleagues from the ECB, what they've said. Actually, the question of connectivity is not only important in terms of migration, but even in the user testing phase, you need connectivity. So the matter is even more urgent than everyone perhaps thinks after the migration presentation. But I'll be saying more about the business decisions and the organizational model decisions and how and why the matter is one of an urgency. So even for user testing, connectivity is needed, and that starts next year.
Other questions? No? Okay. Thank you very much, Holger, for the presentation, and thank you for your questions.